I've been trying to figure out how to explain this for about 3 weeks now. Every time I sit down to do it, I end up staring at the wall for a while and then making tea I don't drink. So I'm just going to start from the beginning, or what I think is the beginning. I'm not totally sure anymore where the beginning actually is, and that's actually part of what bothers me. I moved into Harwick Court in February. 4-story brick building on the edge of a neighborhood that used to be something and is now mostly a through road for people going somewhere else. The kind of place with a name that sounds dignified and isn't. Built in the 70s. Parking lot on 2 sides, 1 elevator. I moved there because it was cheap and available, and I'd just come out of a situation where cheap and available mattered more than anything else. I looked at it once, didn't see anything obviously wrong, and signed the lease. My apartment is 3B, 3rd floor, 2nd unit from the stairwell on the left side of the building. Directly across the hallway from me is 3A. That's where this starts. The first thing I noticed about 3A was that the door was different. Every other apartment door in the building is the same hollow core wood, painted the same slightly too yellow off-white brushed nickel handle, standard deadbolt. The kind of door that exists in 10,000 buildings exactly like this one. The door to 3A was steel, not dramatically steel, not a vault. It was painted the same off-white, sat in the same frame. But when I was moving in and knocked my elbow against it by accident, the sound it made, the absence of sound, told me immediately it wasn't hollow. The impact just stopped. No resonance, like hitting a wall. I remember thinking, previous tenant was paranoid or had something worth protecting. Then I went back to unloading boxes and didn't think about it for a month. February was uneventful. Data entry work for an insurance aggregator, exactly as mind-dissolving as it sounds. Wake up, coffee, laptop, lunch I didn't taste, more laptop, some approximation of dinner, bad sleep. The radiators were technically functional but not enthusiastic about it. Most mornings I could see my breath until around 10. I learned the building sounds the way you always do in a new place. The elevator ran slow and made a low hydraulic moan when it passed the 3rd floor. The pipes knocked every morning around 6:15. A television somewhere above me was always on, never loud enough to make out. The stairwell door at the end of the hall had a self-closing mechanism, slightly out of calibration. It always closed in 2 stages, a fast swing and then a slow, deliberate final click. I also learned the hallway's temperature. The 3rd floor ran cold generally, which I assumed was age and insulation. But there was a stretch of hallway directly outside 3A that was consistently colder than the rest. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just the kind of thing you notice if you walk the same 12 feet every day for weeks. A few degrees. I told myself it was the absence of a radiator on that wall, or a gap in the airflow somewhere. I stopped looking for a better explanation around week 3. These things became furniture. You stop noticing furniture. In March the 12th or 13th, I think I got up around 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and wanted water. I didn't turn on my lights, I knew the layout. I filled a glass, drank it standing at the kitchen window looking out at the empty parking lot, and turned back toward the bedroom. The hallway outside is visible through the gap at the bottom of my front door. A thin yellow line from the corridor lights. I'd noticed it before it disappeared briefly whenever my neighbor from 3C came home late from his night shift, his feet interrupting the light for a moment as he passed. That night, walking back through my dark apartment, I noticed the line under my door was different. Brighter, and slightly blue-white rather than yellow. My brain reached for explanations automatically. Maintenance had changed a bulb, maybe. I almost accepted that and went back to bed. Instead, I opened my door. The hallway was the same as always. Same yellow overhead fluorescence. Same flat carpet. Same row of identical off-white doors. Except under the door of 3A, there was light. I want to be careful here. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a horror movie light. It was the ordinary low light of a lamp or an overhead fixture in a room where someone was awake or had left something on. The kind of thing that would be completely unremarkable in any occupied apartment. The thing is, 3A was empty. I'd confirmed this early on.
The building manager, a man named Jerry, had mentioned it when I signed my lease. "Between occupants," was the phrase he used. I stood in my doorway and looked at the light. Then I noticed something else. The pipes. They'd been quiet all night. But standing there at 2 in the morning, I realized they were knocking. Faintly, not their usual morning rhythm, but present. A slow, irregular knock, like something settling under pressure. I went back inside.
The least interesting explanation. Maintenance, a walkthrough. Someone who'd forgotten to switch something off was almost certainly correct. I held on to that and went to sleep. I didn't see the light again for 11 days. Thought about it twice. Reached the same conclusion both times. Nothing. Then on a Thursday night, I came back from the grocery store around 9:30, stepped off the elevator, turned toward my door, and stopped. The light was there again under 3A. I'd been looking at this door for 6 weeks, passed it hundreds of times. But seeing the light from 30 feet down the hallway, with the full perspective of the corridor, was different from seeing it up close. From a distance, it looked, I want to be precise here because I'm not trying to sensationalize anything. It looked inhabited. There was a quality to it that suggested warmth, presence, the kind of ambient illumination that comes from a place where someone has arranged their evening. I went to my door, unlocked it, went inside. I did not knock on 3A. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to the instinct not to disturb something that isn't yours. The feeling that whatever was happening on the other side of that door was categorically not my business. That instinct was stronger than my curiosity, and I listened to it. I think about that choice a lot more now than I used to. Around this time, small things started accumulating. The elevator began stopping on the 3rd floor without opening. Not every time, maybe once every few days. I'd hear it arrive, the mechanical settling of it leveling with the floor, and I'd wait for the doors. They wouldn't open. After a few seconds, the elevator would move on, up or down, as if it had made a mistake and corrected it. I mentioned this to my neighbor from 3C once, a man named Paul I'd spoken to maybe 4 times total. He shrugged and said the elevator had always done that. When I said it seemed to be happening more, he looked at me for a moment and said he hadn't noticed. The fluorescent nearest 3A had started flickering. Just that one, the others were steady. A brief stutter, then stable again. I put in a maintenance request. Nothing was done. Once, coming home late, I caught a smell in the corridor. Wet concrete, with something underneath it I couldn't name. Strongest outside 3A, faded toward the stairwell, gone by morning. I started logging things in a notes app on my phone. I'm not sure exactly when I started doing that. At some point, it had just become something I was doing. I found out about the condemnation in mid-April. I was in the stairwell and passed a woman from the 2nd floor on her phone, not worried about being overheard. As I walked by, I caught a fragment. No, the whole East Wing, apparently. Both buildings. They condemned it last November. I kept walking, but the word stayed with me. That evening, I searched the property address in the city's building records database, publicly available. Anyone can access it. Permits, violations, inspection history, condemnation status. Harwick Court appeared. Under the entry for the eastern building, the one I was living in, there was a condemnation notice dated the previous November. Structural assessment. Water damage to load-bearing elements on the 3rd and 4th floors. Notice of unfit habitation. I read that several times. Then I looked at the date. The condemnation had been filed 4 months before I signed my lease. I sat back from the laptop. Here's the honest thing about how I processed this. I wasn't frightened. I was annoyed. The specific, tired annoyance of realizing you've been managed rather than told the truth. I started drafting a mental email to the property management company. Lease, validity, tenant rights, whether I could leave without penalty. I was treating it as a logistical problem. It took me almost 2 full days to connect it to the light. I went back and read the structural assessment more carefully the second time. There was a section describing the location of the primary water intrusion as a contained area of significant structural compromise on the third floor,
Eastern building. The language called it isolated but severe. The assessment recommended restricted access to affected units, plural, units. I looked at that word for a long time. I was on the third floor of the Eastern building. My unit shared a wall with 3A. Whatever the assessment had identified, it was close enough to matter to both of us. I closed the laptop and stood at my window. The parking lot was empty. The security light at the far end had been flickering for weeks. What made me stop rationalizing was something small. I was on hold with the property management company about a window that had started sticking, and I wandered out into the hallway without thinking the way you do when you're waiting and need somewhere to put your attention. I looked at 3A's door, and I noticed. I don't know how I'd missed it. There was no unit number on it. Every other door on the floor had a small brushed nickel number plate. 3A didn't. There was a faint rectangular outline, where a plate had been a slightly less faded patch of paint, but the plate itself was gone. The property management line picked up. I got the window sorted, went back inside. But I stood at my kitchen counter for several minutes after, not doing anything. The Notes app had 14 entries. I knocked on Jerry's door on a Tuesday afternoon in May. He answered the way people answer unexpected knocks, resetting his expression slightly. Not alarmed, not pleased. I told him I had questions about 3A. His face did something I've spent a long time since trying to describe accurately. It didn't go blank. It went managed. A small calibration. Too fast. Too practiced to be spontaneous. The face of someone who had answered this particular question before and had prepared for it. He said the unit wasn't occupied. I told him I'd seen a light on in there more than once, always at night. He said it could be light from the hallway getting in under the door. I told him the light was originating inside 3A, that I'd checked from multiple positions in the corridor, that it wasn't a reflection. He said he'd look into it. His eyes moved to a point just past my shoulder while he said this. Not shifty, not the darting eyes of someone caught in a lie. More the steady, slightly unfocused gaze of someone completing a transaction they've completed before and have no interest in completing again. I said, the building was condemned last November, before I moved in. A pause, shorter than I expected. He said there was a compliance process, that the management company was handling it, that there was no danger to current residents. I asked what the compliance process involved. Specifically, he said he wasn't the person to ask, and then, without being rude, he closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Somewhere below me, the elevator arrived at a floor and didn't open. The management company responded to my email in 3 days. They confirmed an active compliance remediation process, assured me current residents had been informed of all relevant safety information, said a full update would be provided upon completion of the assessment phase. They did not address 3A. I replied, asked specifically about 3A. No response. Sent a follow-up 2 weeks later. Nothing. Around this time, I started sleeping worse. Not dramatically. Not nightmares or full insomnia. Just a quality of sleep that felt less complete. I'd wake at 2 or 3 and lie there with a low-grade alertness that didn't quite go away, and I'd find myself listening to the hallway. I started checking the gap under my front door at night. Not compulsively, but regularly enough that I noticed I was doing it. I caught myself one evening standing in the kitchen holding a kettle I'd apparently filled, but forgotten I'd filled. Not sure how long I'd been standing there. I'd been thinking about the assessment, about the word units, plural. The Notes app had 23 entries. There was a week in late May when nothing happened. No light, no elevator pauses. The corridor near 3A stayed cold, but no more than usual. I almost convinced myself I was done with it. Then the power went out. A storm came through on a Wednesday evening, wind and rain, the kind of weather that overloads circuits in older buildings. The lights in my apartment went out around 8:30.
The hallway outside went dark. I found my phone flashlight and sat in the kitchen and waited.
I wasn't thinking about 3A. I was thinking about whether my laptop was charged. Then I stood up to get something from the counter, and the gap under my front door caught my eye. The hallway was dark, but under the door of 3A, there was light. I stood at my door for a long time. The building was dark. Not just my unit, I could hear reactions from other floors, a voice from above me, Paul's door opening and closing across the hall. The corridor lights were off, the elevator wasn't running, and 3A had light. Not emergency lighting, not the greenish glow of an exit sign. The same quality of light I had been seeing for months, low, warm, steady, originating from somewhere inside that unit, from a source I couldn't identify, in a building that had just lost power completely. The electricity came back on 11 minutes later. I checked my phone. The light under 3A was still there when I went to bed. I don't know what time it went off. I didn't check. I started watching the mailboxes after that. For about a month, 3A's box had been empty every time I looked. Then one morning, there was a standard white business envelope in it. The kind that usually means a utility notice or an institutional form letter. By that evening, it was gone. Someone had come in and collected it during the day, from an apartment that officially contained no one. I went back to the notes. I'd logged the dates of every light sighting. 9 confirmed occurrences. When I lined them up against everything else I'd recorded, I noticed that 7 out of 9 times the light appeared. I'd also noted one of the other anomalies on the same night or within 24 hours. I stared at that for a long time.
I'm not saying it means anything. I'm including it because it's what I noticed, and I've been trying to include everything I noticed. I went back to the building records one final time and searched for my own unit. I searched for 3B Harwick Court.
No results. I tried variant searches, different formatting, the property parcel ID, my own name from the lease. Nothing. 3A appeared, 3C appeared, 3D appeared. Units on every other floor appeared. The building itself appeared as a property. 3B, the unit whose lease I had signed, whose address appeared on my mail, where I had been living for 4 months, did not appear in any city record I could find. Not as vacant, not as under review, not as condemned. It simply wasn't there. Here is what I've been sitting with. The condemnation flagged the 3rd floor for restricted access to affected units, plural. There is an active compliance process no one will explain. The management company rented me an apartment 4 months after that condemnation. My unit has no city record. The unit across from mine has a steel door, no number plate, a separate power source, and has received mail that someone collected. What I keep returning to is the framing of the structural assessment. Contained, isolated, they knew exactly where the problem was. They rented me a unit inside that problem anyway. What I can't resolve, and I mean this precisely, not how, not when, the why specifically, is what you would need an occupied unit for. If the building is genuinely dangerous, renting it out creates liability. If the compliance process is real, it would typically require the building to be empty. You don't keep people in a compromised structure unless you need them there. Unless the people being there is part of what you're doing. What would you need to monitor that would require a person present over time without that person understanding why they were there? What gets measured through occupancy? I've drafted 3 versions of an email to the city building inspector. Every version reveals as I write it that I don't fully understand what I'm reporting, that the shape of what's happening has edges I can't see around yet. The pipes knocked at 6:15 this morning, same as every morning. The light was under 3A's door again. Last night I didn't look for long. I made tea an hour ago. It's cold. I'm going to drink it anyway, and then write the email.